Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington, DC. I'm Nick Harper, and in this bulletin we'll get you a roundup of the stories developing around the world. First up, the headlines. UK PM Boris Johnson receives Sue Gray's report into alleged Downing Street party COVID breaches. PM Boris Johnson, who promised to swiftly release the report in public, is expected to make a statement later. UN Security Council to hold key meeting on Ukraine today. The agenda of meeting includes discussions on threats to international security. Amid ongoing hectic parleys over Ukraine, the Russian Foreign Ministry says Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and US Secretary of State Antony Blinken to hold talks on Tuesday. No face-to-face meeting planned. US Congressman Scott Perry writes to President Biden over the appointment of Masood Khan as Pakistani envoy to the US, calls him a terror sympathizer, who praised terror groups like Hizbul Mujahideen. Beijing records its highest number of new COVID-19 cases for a year and a half on Sunday, as the Chinese capital gears up to host the Winter Olympics in 5 days' time. And the African Union suspends Burkina Faso following the coup that ousted President Kabore. The suspension to remain in place until constitutional order is restored in the country. For months now, leaders of the West, the United States and Russia have been engaged in a war of words. The political shadowboxing has escalated over a possible Russian invasion into Ukraine. The diplomacy aimed at easing tensions now moves to New York. The United Nations Security Council will meet today at the request of the United States to discuss Russia's troop buildup near the Ukrainian border. The United States says the meeting of the 15-member body will give Russia a chance to explain itself and to explain its actions. But Russia has indicated that it could try to block the meeting. 9 votes are needed for the meeting to proceed, and Washington says that it's confident it has enough support. But the UNSC meeting would only see all its members putting out their views openly. The Council will not take any action, even if Russia were to invade Ukraine. A simple statement needs consensus support, and Russia could veto any bid for a resolution. Russia, one of the 5 permanent veto-wielding powers on the Council, along with the US, France, Britain and China, is set to assume the Council's rotating presidency on February the 1st. So what can Russia do as a Security Council president? Well, the role is largely an administrative one. It, however, does involve scheduling meetings, so Russia could delay any attempts by other members to request another discussion on its actions. A discussion on Ukraine is already due on February the 17th. Diplomats say it's a regularly scheduled meeting on the Minsk agreements, which were endorsed by the UNSC in 2015 and designed to end a separatist war in eastern Ukraine. The UN General Assembly is also set to hold an annual discussion on the situation in occupied territories in Ukraine later in February. In case Russia invades Ukraine, analysts say action at the United Nations is likely to mirror what happened in 2014 after Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimea region. The UN Security Council has met several times since then to discuss the Ukraine crisis. In 2014, the Council voted on a US draft resolution opposing a referendum on the status of Crimea and urging countries to not recognise it. It received 13 votes in favour. China abstained, but importantly, Russia cast a veto. The West even took a similar text to the 193 member of the UN General Assembly. Now, the UNGA adopted a resolution declaring the referendum invalid. 100 votes were in favour, 11 against, and 58 abstentions. 24 countries didn't vote. The General Assembly resolutions carry political weight, but they're not legally binding. Unlike the UN Security Council, no country has veto power in the UN General Assembly. So far, the West's diplomacy at the United Nations over the latest Russian military build-up near Ukraine has largely focused on trying to rally support among UN members by accusing Moscow of undermining the UN Charter. Russia has already denounced the scheduled UNS meet. It's called it a clear PR stunt orchestrated by the United States. Well, for more on this, we can cross live to our WION correspondent, Susan Tarani, who's joining us live from New York City. Susan, the UN Security Council is going to be holding this crucial meeting in the next couple of hours at the request of the United States. But what can we expect from the US side? And is the US planning to further build pressure on Russia?
So the United States has been really hyping up this meeting at the United Nations Security Council for the past week, with UN ambassador going on the Sunday shows here in the United States and saying this is an opportunity for Russia to explain its actions and activities on the Ukrainian border. And while we're open to hearing what Russia has to say, we're not going to sit there and, take quote unquote Russia's propaganda. The problem with that is, these words can only go so far at the United Nations Security Council chamber, because first, as you mentioned, Russia has veto-wielding power. Second of all, Russia will assume the presidency of the United Nations Security Council in the month of February. That's in a day from now. And while this is more of a procedural assumption of power, if you may, it can really call and not call how the meetings move forward. And we did see, as in the case of Crimea back in 2014, that the Security Council, beyond issuing resolutions, really can't go too far. Another issue is that Russia denies that it wants to invade Ukraine. So at this point, it's what the Western powers say against what Russia says. So we'll have to see what happens at the Security Council today. But it is an opportunity for the United States and the West to perhaps have its voice heard. It's maybe take a united stance, something that people have been questioning at this point, on whether or not the United States is in line with its European allies against Russia or not, and for the United States and the international community to see where Russia stands in its relations with the West, how it wants to move forward, and with Ukraine, more importantly as well. We will hear from Ukraine as well. Let's not forget.
Well, Susan, Russia has already denounced the UN Security Council meeting as a PR stunt orchestrated by the US. Like we said, 9 votes are needed for the meeting to proceed. What are your feelings? Do you think Russia can block it at this stage?
Russia has veto power, even if, no, possibly not, but even if it doesn't, it's not able to block it. The question again remains, and this is not only regarding Russia and Ukraine, the question is what the Security Council at this point can really do, even in a hypothetical scenario, if Russia goes ahead and invades Ukraine, let alone a preemptive meeting like this one where an invasion hasn't taken place. The question right now for many is, what is the point of this Security Council meeting? And unfortunately, that's something that I think many analysts and experts have seen, regarding Burma, Myanmar, Afghanistan even, and that's the fear right now, that this might be a platform for the United States and the West to, come out and denounce Russia for a move that it hasn't taken, and for Russia to have the upper hand on the eve of assuming its presidency of the United Nations Security Council. A lot of the moving parts right now. We'll know in a few hours, and we'll be at the United Nations when that meeting takes place, and post that meeting, and we'll keep you updated. But as for now, the prospects of something grand coming out of this meeting, even a resolution, is pretty grim.
Thank you, Susan. Now is Susan Tirani joining us live from New York City. Well, next today, earlier this month, 2 New York Police Department officers, both in their 20s, were killed responding to a disturbance call in the city's Harlem neighborhood. The suspect used a Glock 45 that had been stolen in Baltimore in 2017. The NYPD hero officers Wilbert Nora and Jason Rivera are being remembered by people across America who are also concerned about rising gun violence and the seeming flood of firearms across the United States. Officials in America, especially in New York City, are calling for stronger measures against gun violence and gun trafficking across state lines. As per data, in the year 2021, law enforcement agencies in America's biggest cities seized or recovered near-decade-high numbers of firearms. Several police departments have also reported the recovery of a high number of ghost guns. But what exactly are ghost guns? Well, these weapons are so called as they're untracked and untraceable firearms that are often bought online and then assembled at home. The rising flow of firearms in major US cities is worrying. In New York alone, police made nearly 4,500 gun arrests in 2021, up 3% from the year before, 2020, but a staggering 26% rise from 2019. Experts say the high volume of guns recovered comes as the country is witnessing a surge of gun violence since the beginning of the pandemic. Over 2/3 of the most populous US cities recorded more homicides in 2021 than the previous year. At least 10 cities set an all-time homicide record, and the majority of them were committed with a firearm. Gun seizures and recoveries by police departments in major American cities were higher than those in 2020. Many cities reached highs that were not seen in at least a decade. In Philadelphia, over 5,900 gun crimes were recovered by police, the highest in at least a decade. In Chicago, the number stood at 12,000, including assault weapons. Experts say an increasing number of firearms makes it difficult to track the true scope of owned guns, which makes addressing gun violence effectively even more challenging. Since 2020, gun homicides and assaults have steadily risen. The number of homicides in 2020 increased almost 30% from 2019, the largest single-year increase since the 1960s. About 77% of reported murders in 2020 were committed with a gun, up from 74% in 2019. As gun violence in the United States escalates, a Supreme Court decision this term could turn decades of gun restrictions in major cities. In November, the Supreme Court justices expressed scepticism over an existing New York law that prohibits people from carrying concealed handguns in public. If the law is overturned, activists and gun advocacy groups say the ruling could have a ripple effect across the states. The effects could include more gun violence, more firearm deaths, and more lawlessness in the United States.
Extendable start.
With thousands of truckers gathered in the Canadian capital of Ottawa to protest against Trudeau's vaccine mandate, the city has been thrown into complete political chaos. Ottawa, the capital city and the base of the Canadian government, is witnessing unprecedented scenes. People have been asked not to venture out near the Parliament Hill. As the protests continue to intensify, demonstrators plan to stay in downtown Ottawa near Parliament Hill for the next couple of days. The demonstrations are part of the self-titled Freedom Convoy, which has come together to protest the government's vaccine mandates. The movement was sparked by a vaccine mandate for truckers crossing the US-Canada border, which was implemented by the Trudeau government earlier this month. Under the new rules, all unvaccinated Canadian truckers crossing the boundary will have to quarantine themselves once they've returned back home. Protests, which were initially started by the truckers from the West, have now brought in supporters from several conservative groups. Along with vaccine mandates, demonstrators have also voiced their anger over Trudeau's other COVID rules. With protests intensifying with each passing day, authorities have now ramped up security around Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his family. According to reports, Trudeau and his family have been taken to an undisclosed location due to security concerns. The Prime Minister's office updated Trudeau's itinerary to say he was somewhere in the National Capital Region. Trudeau recently went into isolation and has been working remotely after one of his children tested positive for COVID-19. As per a latest United Nations report, the Taliban and its allies are believed to have killed over 100 former Afghan officials and security force members who worked with international organisations following the US withdrawal. The report is the latest in a series of warnings of a worsening humanitarian crisis in the region.
A UN report seen by Reuters says the Taliban and its allies are believed to have killed scores of former Afghan officials, security force members, and people who worked with the international military contingent.
6 months after the takeover by the Taliban, Afghanistan is hanging by a thread.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres' report to the UN Security Council paints a picture of worsening living conditions for Afghanistan's 39 million people, despite an end of combat after the Taliban's takeover in August. Guterres described the situation as, quote, an entire complex social and economic system shutting down. The report is the latest in a series of warnings the UN chief has issued in recent months about the humanitarian and economic crises that accelerated after the Taliban seized Kabul. Guterres recommended the Council approve a restructuring of the UN mission to deal with the situation, including the creation of a new human rights monitoring unit. Despite a general amnesty announced by the Taliban, the UN mission has determined that, since August 15th, more than 100 former officials, security force members, and people who worked for the U.S.-led international military contingent have been killed, over two-thirds of them allegedly by the Taliban or their affiliates. The mission added that, quote, human rights defenders and media workers continue to come under attack, intimidation, harassment, arbitrary arrest, ill treatment, and killings. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden on Sunday called on the Taliban rulers to release a U.S. civil engineer who was abducted 2 years ago and is believed to be the last American hostage held by the Taliban. Monday marks the Americans' second year in captivity.
A cafe in Thailand is reaping dividends after it transformed its interior from photogenic sakura trees to cryptocurrency data screens. Take a look.
Hip Coffee and Restaurant isn't necessarily known for its food and coffee, but it has recently drawn many day traders eager to feast their eyes upon dozens of beaming television screens showing the latest trends and prices on various cryptocurrencies. Originally founded in 2013, the cafe said its number of customers has doubled since installing the crypto data screens in 2020. Customers who used to only visit during weekends to take pictures with the sakura decorations are now packing it in during weekdays.
Having so many screens helps a lot. Like 4 to 5 days ago when the market crashed. Immediately know and get to analyze crashing factors and whether we should execute buy orders or not.
The cafe has already drawn a loyal clientele of crypto investors as a part of community that the restaurant intends to sustain. Along with fresh coffee, HIP said that it aims to provide an avenue for alternative investment opportunities for people around Nakhon Ratchasima province. The cafe already offers free crypto investment consulting and is planning on starting its own cryptocurrency coin.
The customers who come here can be separated into 3 types. First, experts who want to have community. Second, people who just started investing and want to meet new people. Third, the ones who know nothing about crypto but just want to take a photo.
To me, it's exciting because I get to meet people with the same interest. We get to exchange information because in the trading world, the more information you have, the stronger upper hand you will get. We are competing against millions of people, not just one.
Cryptocurrencies have gained momentum in Thailand, which saw as much as 251 billion baht or $7.62 billion in digital asset trading transactions in November, data from the Securities and Exchange Commission showed. However, the recent falls in cryptocurrency prices have also highlighted the volatility in the market. Thailand's government will also soon decide on more guidelines for a cryptocurrency tax that was introduced in 2018 in an effort to make it fairer and more simple. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Well, that's all we've got time for today. Thanks for watching. I'm Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. Stay tuned to WION World is One.
One World Trade Center